It's Alan Karpik on our Monday Night Memories series. The good folks at Chariot Auto Group. Nate Barrett on the call here today, so to speak. An institution there at that. You're not old enough to be an institution just yet, but you're pretty close at Chariot Auto Group in Twin City. We appreciate them. This is a conversation we could all have with a beverage of choice. And probably talk for 2 or 3 hours. We're not going to bore all of you out there for more than probably a half hour here. But the topic today is it's Monday Night Memories series, but we're talking with some Joe Tiller experts, and we really got him in the room here today with Tom Kubat, Lafayette Journal and Courier, who covered Joe Tiller for each of his 12 seasons. I think I'm correct on that. And Joe, they both retired at the same time as well. And Tom, of course, wrote the book. We always plug books on the show. The Tiller, Not Your Average Joe, fine book. You can see it here. And Tom is still available, I'm sure, on Amazon. If not, it's Sports Publishing. I'm sure you can find that. We also have Jim Vruggink joining us, and Jim with the National Football Foundation. And Jim worked obviously in athletics for many, many years and was involved with Joe Tiller. Tom Schott here joining too. Tom nobody knows Joe Tiller better than and a better friend of the Tillers and all the things he's done for Arnett Tiller. And Joe over the years has been very, very important. Also wrote the book on Purdue football too. So there's a lot of knowledge. Nate, you and I are going to have to catch up here, man. We're going to have to work up our knowledge.
There's some knowledge here.
But that's all right. So I'm going to start with you, Tom. Looking back 15 years, it is hard to believe. We know that not only is college football has changed more, and college sports changed more in the last year than it has in the last 2 years than it had probably in the 13 years preceding. But it is a different time. We've kind of thrown out that question about how different it is, but yet the legacy of Joe Tiller and the basketball and grass and the speed up play of college football is still alive and well, different variations of that. But give us some perspective on that from your view as you continue to consume sports and look at it from where you sit.
Well, excuse me, even though I lived through it and reported it, I still, when I look back on it, I just think what Joe did, because when I look back on it, the first 12 years that I covered Purdue football were losing seasons. Yeah, every one of them, and then he shows up and granted, he had an advantage that I don't know if he was the only coaching staff, but certainly if not the only one of the very few that ran the spread offense as their primary offense. Other coaches were running it, but it was it wasn't their main offense. So he was very familiar with it, brought his entire staff from Wyoming, and they hit the ground running in the Big Ten. The Big Ten was just totally confused by the whole thing. I remember Joe told me once that when they got started in that first season, the coaches would get together and it was, to them, they thought they were like, it was like Christmas, because they would break the huddle and come out of the huddle and line up, and they couldn't believe the defenses that the other teams were in, and thought this is like taking candy from a baby, and it was instant success. And as we know, it didn't come and go. I mean, he kept it going through all 12 of his years, just tremendously. And, people think of passing and the offense when he was here, but I think an indicator of how good of a coach he was, as far as, he had Brock Spack as a defensive coordinator and Jim Chaney offensive coordinator, and he let them do their thing. And a lot of people forget that Purdue had a pretty good running game at that time. And also there were, I don't know how many years now, but a few years where they either led or near the top in the Big Ten in defense. So it wasn't just the spread offense. It was the total package. I mean, and it was, and then just Joe Tiller, the man, was just so impressive. He had a way of, he didn't, at least on the field that I saw, I didn't ever really see him screaming and yelling at his players. Now, maybe he called them into his office and did that, but he had a way of getting his message across, either with a one sentence put down that got through, or and if you got time for a story, and it's in the book, and I don't know if you guys have read it. Drew Brees told me the time, because he said that Joe Tiller was an amateur psychologist. And he's got that saying that Brees said he lives by today. Do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it the right way, and do it that way all the time. But he told me a time that Joe, it was it was the beginning of the spring semester of Brees's year, and they just had been to the Alamo Bowl, and they were having their first meeting in January. And Joe walked into the room, went up to the podium, and Brees said he had a really kind of sour look on his face. He walked up there and he said, guys, he said, I wanted to have this meeting to tell you this before the news broke. He said, I'm leaving to go to become the head coach at the University of Colorado. I'm taking my staff with me. He said, I know this is a shock. I've enjoyed coaching you guys, good luck. And he walked out of the room. And he said, the players all sitting there, we're mad, we're disappointed, we're upset, we're confused. And he said, it was like 2 minutes later, Tiller walked back in and he said, sorry, guys, I lied to you. He said, but several of you guys lied to me at the end of the fall semester. You were in academic trouble and you lied about it. And it kind of put our team in a tough spot. He said, it's not fun to be lied to, is it? And and again, I thought most coaches would bring those guys that lied, that were in trouble. He would have brought them into his office, either one at a time or as a group, read them the riot act, maybe made them run the stairs or whatever. And maybe Joe did that, but what he did in that room, I thought was brilliant. I mean, as far as getting a point across. And I think that's a good example of how Joe coached his kids.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question he was a master of the human condition and how to get guys to do things not always the conventional way. Tom Schott, you knew him extremely well in his years at Purdue, but also knew him from after retirement and his time out in Wyoming. Talk about his sense of humor was priceless. Certainly, he could have been. I think he and Judd Heathcote were two of the funniest coaches that I ever could actually have done stand-up had they worked on it a little bit, probably. But talk about that sense of humor, but also his ability to get it, a little bit like Tom Kubat said, the ability to get that point across that kept you enough on your toes, even if you were a colleague of his in the athletic department, that expectation was there to get the job done.
Yeah, he was just the greatest in all aspects, and Tom Kubat summarized it very well. But I remember his very first John Purdue function after he was hired, and he gets up on stage and starts talking about his receding hairline, and he said, God created all these heads, and the ones he was embarrassed by, he gave hair to.
Yeah.
Then he said, or as my wife refers to me, and I think we can say this on the internet.
The internet.
In 2023, Arnett refers to me as a solar-powered sex machine. So
there you go.
That was not, kind of the stuff John Purdue Club of the late 1990s was used to hearing, but it certainly set the tone for just an incredible run of humor and quick wit, and just never short for a great story. But my greatest memories certainly. The great success on the field, but just sitting in his office and talk about anything and everything but football, and whether it was politics, and Joe certainly had his opinion on those, the stock market and how to prepare for retirement and everything else. A young professional wanted to hear. He was just the best, but he had a way to make everybody feel comfortable, and he, for a very successful college athletic head coach, had his lack of an ego, as you'll find, as so many Purdue coaches through the years have had. They just understood their role, and whether it was teaching life lessons or getting folks ready to play and compete, he was the master, and there'll never be another one of them, and that's probably a good thing. But he was certainly just the best, and miss him every day. It's hard to believe he's been away from Purdue for as long as he has, and it's hard to believe he's been gone from this earth for as long as he has. But Arnett's doing well, and she was a very big part of his success as well, and her relationship with the student athletes and the staff. It was just such a family atmosphere. I mean, among the coaches and the support staff, and Jim knows this. You couldn't wait to get to work every day to be a part of what he built at Purdue, and certainly the highlight of my career in athletics.
Yeah, I'll follow up and I'll let Jim answer, but Tom, with you, just that contrarian view. I think that was the other thing. He didn't do, it wasn't always it was a lot of what you see is what you get, but there was a different kind of bent to it too. He went about things in a different way. And Arnett, I think, also brought a lot of that too, because Arnett was an art person, different approach, that type of stuff, but they were a great complement to one another. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah,
I'm asking you, Tom Schott. Go ahead.
No, too many Toms here.
Yeah, no doubt.
No, they were the perfect complement. Joe had a saying, leave your wife out of football, but Arnett was entrenched in football, but she knew what her role was, and it was working with the academic staff and making sure the kids got to class, and certainly there was a transition of the roster when Joe got here, and just making sure all those kids were taken care of away from football. But another great story that kind of put Joe in his place, which was tough to do. But one of the Coach of the Year banquets after that very first season in '97, when he was a finalist for a number of national Coach of the Year awards, Joe tells a story, or maybe Arnett tells a story, that they were in their hotel room getting ready for the banquet, and Joe says to Arnett, "Do you realize how many great football coaches there are?" And Arnett said, "One fewer than you do." So,
yeah, that's right. And she was good at that. She was good at that.
And but you're right. They complement each other very well, and she was loyal to him, and vice versa. And I think Joe was quick to admit when he retired and they moved out to Buffalo, Wyoming, he kind of took over. The roles kind of reversed, and he kind of took over supporting all of Arnett's endeavors. Whether it was her artwork, her pottery studio. Some of the other initiatives she had going on out there, and he probably worked as hard doing that as he did coach football. But just a great couple, no doubt about it.
Yeah, Jim Vruggink. You look at the legacy of Joe Tiller, and one of the things that's been important. I think he realized that even early on in his time, though I don't know that he knew how long. As Tom Kubat said, there were job opportunities for him, and he did have chances to leave during his time in West Lafayette, and Colorado was one of them, if I remember right. That was legit at the time. But the fact that he saw also through the National Football Foundation and the Joe Tiller chapter that wasn't named for him just at that point, but the fact that was an important part of being a good football coach, and again, having a good football program is celebrating the legacy of your getting guys in the Hall of Fame and all that. But talk about that and just why that became an important part of what he was all about. And obviously your role over the last 19 years with that, with our celebrating our Legends banquet, et cetera.
Great. Thanks. First of all, I want to agree with everything that Tom and Tom have said so far about Joe. I mean, he certainly, I think the one word about his sense of humor was he was self-deprecating. I mean, he would tell a joke on himself, and I think that kind of brought him down to earth. There aren't a lot of coaches that would have that kind of sense of humor that could put themselves in that position, because they all have pretty big egos. But Joe's ego was such that he wanted to laugh at himself, and as well as have everybody else be able to laugh with him. So, but yeah, his I'll never forget, because Tom Schott was there, and I can't remember who else was standing around, but we were at a Kiwanis Club luncheon back about more than 20 years ago. It was in the spring, and we had a guy came down from the Hall of Fame, College Football Hall of Fame at that time was in South Bend, and the guy who was the director, Bernie Kish, came down to speak at Kiwanis. And so a group of us went over to just hear him talk, and we're standing around talking afterwards. And I think Bernie Kish and Joe had known each other for quite some time earlier. Bernie is a former assistant coach somewhere where they'd cross paths, and so they're talking about the value of having a chapter, a local chapter. And Joe had stood there. I'll never forget this. He pointed at me and said, "Vruggink, you need to find out more about this. We need to have one of those here."
Yeah.
So it kind of became my job. At that time, I was working in the university vice president's office, and my title was director of special projects. So that became one of my special projects, was investigating that and then developing it. And it really was part of my job for several years. And I think we were able to get the right level of cooperation from a large segment of the university that I'm very grateful for. Joe, of course, would go out to golf tournaments and any speaking engagements over the summer, and he would take applications with him. And he was out there selling National Football Foundation as much as he was Purdue football. And he realized the value of it. And of course, I think we've proven over the years that it has been valuable to Purdue, because we've been able to get several people into the College Football Hall of Fame and several more into the Indiana Football Hall of Fame. Both areas that I think Tom Schott will agree, we were frustrated as athletic public relations administrators that we didn't have better representation in those organizations. And it's all about getting, part of our job is getting recognition for our athletes and coaches, and to be able to kind of find a niche that was going to work was quite satisfying. And I think we realized early on that it was going to be a success. And of course, we became the second largest chapter in the country through the good help of people like Bernie Flowers, who went out and sold memberships by just sitting in people offices and talking football and not leaving until you became a member. But we had some great cooperation, and I think Joe was very satisfied and pleased with what we did. He was always prominent at every one of the banquets that we had, every one of the dinners. We were able to get Drew Brees to come back for, I think it was the first 7 or 8 of those, until he got real busy having kids, and now he's coaching, and it's kind of hard to get him back here in the springtime, in June. But we'll get him back one of these days to get him inducted into the Indiana Football Hall of Fame at least. So, but overall, I'm very glad that we named the chapter after Joe, because that's a legacy that will carry on for as long as we can keep the chapter alive, I think, and keep his name in this community and doing some good things and having some positive impression. So, Joe's positivity carries on, and I'm happy to be part of that.
Yeah, I think it's Rod Woodson, Mike Phipps, Dave Butts, Mark Herman, and I'm missing Otis Armstrong are the 5 that have been on the watch, and then that have gotten in the Hall of Fame since the Tiller chapter got up and rolling as much as it has.
And Jim Young, Jim Young came in during that period. Of course, he was. And there was a hiatus where Leroy Keys was the last one prior to Mike Phipps.
Like 1990 to 2006, maybe, Jim, or 2004.
Span of 16 years that we had gone without having an inductee, and we've had now 6 since. So.
And Taylor Stubblefield, Travis Dorsch are on the front porch right now. Ryan Kerrigan will not be far behind, I wouldn't think, and that's quite an accomplishment that there'll be more to celebrate. Nate, you are
and not to get too far off the path, but because of some of the requirements, be considered, Joe Tiller, who arguably changed college football, changed certainly the Big Ten football, isn't even eligible.
Yeah,
and, you have to have a 600 winning percentage to even be considered, and Joe was at 585 or 587 or something. So. That's unfortunate. I'm sure there's a reason for that, but you'd think someone that did as much as he did for the game, especially as Tom Kubat mentioned at the very beginning, 12 straight losing seasons before he got here. And I think, Gary Danielson was back speaking sometime during Joe's time, and he argued that Joe Tiller might be the most important person in the history of Purdue athletics because of what he did at a time when Purdue athletics was struggling financially. And, had a dilapidated stadium, and was, ticket sales were not good, and the whole atmosphere was not good, and Joe revived all that, and it's except for a few years here and there, it's really stayed at that plateau ever since. So it's unfortunate someone that did as much as he did can't be honored as probably he certainly should be.
And we'll get to that. Go ahead, Jim.
Taking that beyond what Tom said, I do think that Joe's legacy of what was accomplished and that memory is in the minds of our fans. So that even though Purdue had some down years within the last decade or so, but it was great to see the fan base respond quickly when the success came back under Jeff Brom. And I think that can be attributed back to the fun that people had in the late 90s, early 2000s. The people remember that, and they remember going to bowl games and having the wide open offense and having that fun at games. And I think that really helped the current administration get the fan base back in place real quickly. So hopefully it'll continue forward as for this next regime.
Yeah, Nate, you lived through as the youngest one on our panel, but just the importance of community and football and what Joe meant to that. I mean, again, as Jim mentioned and Tom mentioned, from 1985 to 96. It was pretty rough around here in terms of interest in football, and with a couple of exceptions certainly, but not many in that. But talk about that and that need and what Joe, and then if you have any of your stories of being around Joe over the years, you always learn something. I was always told, I said every time I was with Joe Tiller, and I wasn't with him as much as you guys have been, but always learned something different from him. There was some life lesson in there somewhere embedded that became, but it did start as a common theme of generally treating people well and with respect, and he was great at that. But Nate, what say you on that?
Well, I actually quoted a variation on what Coach Tiller talked about to some of our team today, and it came out of this. When I was still in high school, my aunt and uncle, Tom Eder, that works with me here at the dealership, they were next door neighbors with Scott Downing, who was Coach Tiller's associate head coach, and got really close with the Downings. And so sometimes when Coach Tiller would have those victory parties at his house, when the assistants and their wives would come and celebrate a victory at the Tiller home, Tom and my aunt got invited to one of those, and I was babysitting the kids. And when Tom got home, he shared with me some of his conversations with Coach Tiller that night. And what Tom remembered about that was Coach Tiller talking about how it's tempting to get too high when we win and think that we're really good, and then you can get too hard on yourself when you lose, and maintaining that balance. And so, in a sales business like we're in every day, that really applies, because the car business has had a couple of really good years, but sometimes you think you're better than you are at the business, and you need to keep grinding and working. And a source of truth also is, when things aren't going as well, don't be so hard on yourself not to keep moving forward. So that's one thing I remember. The second was he bought a Ram truck from Twin City, and I think a lot of Arnett's antiques got hauled around in it over the years. And my grandfather and he would sit in the office and talk about that when he was in for service. So it was a gray Ram. I'm sure some of you guys remember seeing it drive around town, but so we had a little experience with him that way. And then my fondest memories are working as my first gig with the Purdue Radio Network was the audience coordinator job down at Chumley's for his radio show. We were on that show from 2000 to 2005, and just getting to be around him, seeing how he treated the waiters and the waitresses and the fans that would come to his radio show, and seeing that what you thought on television was really what you got when he was in person. I felt like I came away with an impression that he is who he really seems to be. And that sticks out. And then just the fun of being on campus, working for Jim and Tom, when there was such a vibrancy. When I came to campus in fall of 98 and those ensuing years, I mean, there was nothing like it. It was exciting all the time. And, people like Drew Brees were popping into the SID office, and just that sense around campus that something special was happening.
Yeah, interesting, because Drew Brees had a lot of the same qualities that Joe Tiller had. I mean, in terms of just a fundamental decency to him, has those qualities still. And I think that's part of the reason. But then even in somebody Tom Schott's close to, it's Kyle Orton. I enjoyed when Kyle came back last year and talked about his just that, again, Kyle Orton, an intellectually very capable guy, a thoughtful person, a terrific player as well, but just that relationship that those two fostered over the years, I thought was quite unique. All right, legacy is an important thing. Tom Kubat, we've talked about the Tiller Tunnel will be part of Ross-Ade Stadium. There's been discussion over the years of all right, that will be a permanent legacy to him, and it'll always be something that's where that team's going to come out. I know there's always been talk about statues and other things that you could do to commemorate his importance to this program. And yeah, the College Football Hall of Fame is not likely to happen unless they change the rules some way. But this is a guy that it's hard to minimize his impact. And I know you have an opinion on what that importance and how that should be displayed on a permanent basis.
Well, I haven't seen any architectural drawings of the tunnel, or will it be, a sign over when the team out and all that? But to me, forgive me, but when I hear Tiller Tunnel, to me it sounds like a amusement park ride. Yeah. And I just think for what. Not only, the wins and losses in the bowl games, but the type of person he was, Purdue needs to, I think it ought to be at least a statue or a building named after him, because, I hope I'm wrong, but what are the odds of what he did in those 12 years? What are the odds of that happening again at Purdue? I mean, that's hard to accomplish at some of your really, really, the Ohio States and the Michigans and Alabamas to do that. And so I just think Purdue owes him a little bit more respect. I don't want to sound too critical, but I think they've either missed the boat or they're missing the boat. I think they need to do something more special in addition to the tunnel, and I want to just add something following up on what Nate said about sometimes don't get too carried away or don't think you're better than what you really are. I remember one time in his office, Purdue, I think, was kind of struggling in his mind at that time. But he said, you know what? He said, sometimes us coaches and you media people and the fans have to take a different look at it, because if things aren't going right, we have a tendency, like when I watch film, I have a tendency to be very, very, very critical of what we did on that play or whatever. He said, but sometimes maybe we got to say, hey, what that other team did was pretty darn good, and I think that's kind of is represented now in today's world in social media. When your favorite team has a bad game, so many fans hop on social media and just rip everybody in a very unprofessional, unkind way. But I remember when he said that, I don't know, that just stuck with me. And I don't ever regard myself as necessarily being a negative reporter. Sometimes you got to report the truth or you lose your credibility. But, if you're going to be negative or critical, you can do it in a professional way. And I think that helped me think that way, to be more professional about that aspect of the sport. Sorry to interrupt
I think that's right. I will say this, and you and I had this offline conversation. I do think the Tiller Tunnel, at least from what I've seen, I was up there a week or so ago, and there's still, I think it's going to be a challenge. I know that Mike Babinski and company say that they're going to have it done, and I think they'll have enough of it done for the Fresno State game. There's a lot of work to be done. But the tunnel will make an impression just because when people come out. But yeah, it's interesting. There's been a lot. His legacy is he's such a perfect match to what Purdue football has been at its best times over the years, and that is innovative offense and good and some real top individual guys that have made this a very special. Not a great program. We know that Purdue has not been an upper echelon, and probably never will be able to compete on a year in, year out basis with Ohio State and Michigan and et cetera, Penn State and USC, maybe in the Big Ten. But this is he certainly left you with some moments from that standpoint. Tom Schott, I want to go back to the high moments and maybe what you learned from watching that team go to the Rose Bowl. but also even I can remember Joe talking about one of his most challenging moments as a coach was the 2003 loss to Ohio State, and maybe his best team in some ways. We could debate that for a whole nother show, but talk about how Joe Tiller, that was a hard thing for him because I think he realized it wasn't, and of course, 2004, they start out 5-0 and are ranked in the top 5, and things went down from there. But talk about just the highs and lows of a head football coach and what that was for him, because he did have high expectations for this program.
I thought that Ohio State game, as much as he understood the, dealing with the media was part of the job, a very important part of the job, and we certainly had great media coverage and fair media, certainly led by Tom Kubat throughout his time. But he was a little surly after that game, probably the most surly I remember him in the years I worked with him. But I think he kind of felt that maybe it wasn't going to happen at Purdue on a consistent year in, year out basis, competing for the Big Ten, as he thought after the early success that he might be able to achieve. And I think, by that point, Big Ten schools were figuring out what the spread offense is all about and how to better defend it. We're getting better athletes on defense, quicker athletes, certainly, to cover all the receivers from sideline to sideline. But that was the most upset. I remember him. He was very short with his answers, which was never the case for Joe. But yeah, then in 2004 to bounce back, and certainly as wonderful as the Rose Bowl season was, and those 4 wins in October, I'll still argue that the first 5 weeks of the 2004 season, when we were 5-0 and ranked number 5th, and College Game Day was here for the first and still only time at Purdue, and by gosh, had Wisconsin beat, and Game Day was coming back the next week for the Michigan game, and somehow that 17-7 lead got away from us. And I think it took Purdue football and certainly Purdue fans many years. Some probably still haven't gotten over it, the dreaded Kyle Orton fumble. Yeah, it was. He was the best at handling the highs and lows. But that Ohio State game, I'll never forget. He was as surly and as short as he ever was. I think with good reason. That was a game he probably thought we should have won, and you wondered, if you can't beat him with this team in this situation, will you ever consistently beat them? And that proved to be the case. So.
Yeah, Tom Kubat talked about the fact that the Purdue's 2002 and 2003 had 2 of the best defenses, or were certainly top 3 in the Big Ten both years. I believe statistically, I could be wrong in 2003, but they.
Well, shoot, how many draft picks did we have? They're all on defense in those couple of years. But those were, and this show could go on in so many different ways. But I look at someone like a Gilbert Gardner, who came here as a wide receiver, and they move him to defense, and he becomes an all Big Ten linebacker and plays in the NFL, or Matt Light, who was recruited to Purdue by Jim Coletto as a tight end, and Joe Tiller says, I think you might be a pretty good left tackle, and you might be able to play for quite a few years past college if you do that. And Matt hemmed and hawed and finally gave into it, and of course went on to be a Pro Bowl, Super Bowl champion for many years with the Patriots. So that staff was the very, very best at figuring out where guys best belonged, and not always recruiting them to play the position they played in high school, but eyeballing where they might have more success in college. And I bet they batted 900 out on those, moving people around and finding a home for them. And just another great skill that he had and his staff had. And he'd be the first to give his staff credit. And those coaches that went on to great careers as head coaches and NFL coaches really is phenomenal.
Yeah, it is. And there are some real fun personalities. That's back in the days when, and I understand the world's different now, and it really is, but boy, it was fun just to, we were not always able to be around those guys for a lot of time, but when we did, again, it was interesting, it was fun, and they certainly, I'm talking about his coaches, but also Joe himself, but it's the Jim Cheneys of the world and the Brock Spacks still are just unique individuals that, in the Greg Olsons on down the line, just had a lot of guys that were great to deal with. Jim Vruggink, one thing on Joe Tiller and Drew Brees is kind of the living reminder also of that unbelievable legacy and the bond that those two had, and the fact that here Drew Brees turns out to be not only a great player in the National Football League, but also is a star. I mean, he's known throughout the world for other things, certainly for football, but other things as well. But talk about that bond and the interesting relationship those two had, and the fact that you promoted him heavily in 1999 and 2000 for the Heisman Trophy. Got the chance to go to New York twice with him as well. Drew Brees, obviously, but that special bond that really does help that legacy live on in a guy like Drew.
Well, that's true, and I think one thing I'll always remember is Joe Tiller very early on when we were talking saw the potential and saw what Drew Brees was going to be or could be. I remember him coming in. I don't know if it was in his office or our office, but he said, "You guys better really enjoy this. This guy is a once in a lifetime experience having this guy with us." And I think he was saying that for himself as well as for us. And so we embraced it. I mean, Drew was absolutely wonderful to work with, so cooperative, so down to earth. All the suggestions that we would make to help promote Purdue, which he knew was also promoting him. But his bigger concern was what's this going to mean for Purdue? How can this help us be a better team or get more recognition or whatever? But some of the ideas that just came out, I remember, and I was talking with somebody from the media not too long ago about and this was an idea that I can't remember if Tom and I presented it jointly or where it came from, but back in the in that day and age, so much of the television coverage was we were depending on the local affiliates to help us get the word out about and the visuals out about our program. And whenever there was a afternoon football game in Ross-Ade Stadium, the Indianapolis TV stations would have to leave as soon as the game was over to get back to Indy to get it on the air, to get their sports shows for that afternoon on. And we realized that if we made Drew available immediately after the game, rather than having a half hour, 45 minutes or an hour go by before he would be available in the media room, make Drew available on the field. And we created a box. The stadium crew built this box. We called it the Breeze box. And as soon as the game was over, they brought that over. That was on the sidelines. They brought it over to the corner of the end zone, right past where the team would have to be leaving, right on that southeast corner of the stadium. And Drew would hop up on this box and do a little mini press conference for the TV people. And they would gather around and be able to ask him questions and whatever. It maybe took no more than 2 minutes, and he would jump off and go back and join his teammates in the locker room. But that helped to get visuals of him talking about his game out nationally, because they would get back to Indianapolis and put it up, available for others to see. And I think that was something that was, I don't want to call it cutting edge, but it was unique. I don't remember anybody ever having done that before. And I'm not sure many coaches would have agreed to let a player do that, but Joe did. And we were, of course, there was an idea that was presented to Joe also. We weren't going to do that behind his back, but it was very much appreciated by the media. And I think had a lot to do with him getting some exposure. Still feel terrible about the way things worked out, and the fact that he didn't get the attention that he deserved. I thought if our season had ended at the end of October that year, he would have been the Heisman Trophy winner. But because we had the last 5 weeks of the season, Purdue played only 2 games. We didn't get a lot of exposure, whereas Oklahoma and Florida State had 5 games each, and their 2 quarterbacks were having great seasons, and they ended up getting more of the exposure. And but it I felt like we did everything we possibly could, and we had the full cooperation of the head coach, the player, even the players' parents were on board with everything we did. And I felt really good about the campaign we had for trying to get Drew Brees the Heisman Trophy, but it just fell short.
Yeah.
Alan, I got a
Yeah.
follow up to that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just talking about Drew's relationship with the media. Over the years, there were, Tom or Jim would set me up with an interview with a player for the next day or something. And then for whatever reason, the player maybe didn't show up and they would hop in and reschedule it. But there were, I think, twice where I had interviews set up with Drew. And then all of a sudden, I don't even know if maybe he got the phone numbers, but he called me the first time and just said, "Hey, something's come up. I can't make it to our interview tomorrow at noon. But how about I'll meet you at McDonald's across Northwestern Avenue at 2. Will that work for you?" I said, "That's fine. Don't worry about it." And he did that twice. He took it upon himself to reschedule the interview. So to me, that was a example of the type of young man he was back then.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
part of that program too.
Yep.
All right, Nate, I'm gonna put you on the spot for your favorite. Outside of the ones that there are other games that you recall that really stand out. I mean, we obviously talked about the Rose Bowl and all that, so I'm going to put those games as off limits. What are other games that what would it be? 2008 Purdue Indiana, his last game, which was an interesting to see Joe very emotional on that day was a lasting memory. But tell me what you think in terms of other ones, and you are allowed to use some of the ones that we've mentioned if that's
Well, yeah, Alan, first one that stands out is I was still a senior in high school, and I went to the games growing up, basically from the '87 season on, and I was there when Notre Dame just would tear Purdue apart. When Lou Holtz was there. So the first thing I remember actually is everybody, the Notre Dame game in '97, and everybody rushing the field, and even seeing Carolyn Peck down there on the field after the that
designated partier. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, when you're 17 and everybody just rushed the field to say, "Wow, Purdue finally beat Notre Dame." And of course it was coming off the Toledo loss in the first week. That one's a hard one to top. And then I think also I think a lot about the 2000 Michigan game and where Purdue stood at halftime in that game, and then to come back and win it the way they did. We talked about Nancy Cross the last time we did one of these, and she got an honor for her career at Purdue this weekend at the NFF banquet. I think I remember Nancy handing out roses in the press box, and I was up on the roof as she was handing those out, and just being a part of that night in the press box was just as good as it gets. And seeing Coach Tiller and Drew with that bucket down on the field in the melee there. I have, that like a lot of people, I have that on my basement wall, and just to have been there for that as a Purdue fan is just pretty hard to top.
Yeah, I think
if I can jump in.
Tom.
Certainly, I don't know, probably halfway through Joe's tenure, maybe a little past that, I asked him to reflect on his 5 memorable wins to that point, and that Notre Dame game that Nate mentioned was number one. He felt that really was key to springboarding the success. If they don't win that game after the Toledo loss, how does that season maybe play out differently? But my favorite story of that whole, kind of 2-week swing, Rosie Colvin tells the story after they lose at Toledo in the opener. He says, we go in there, we expect this, new guys that come in, this, rip us and tell us how terrible we are. And in classic, although we didn't know it was classic at the time, Joe Tiller fashion, he walks in and says, "Well, fellas, I don't think we're going to cancel any practices." And Rosie said everyone was just so at ease that they weren't, being yelled at and screamed at, that it just kind of set the whole tone for what the future would lie. But that was classic Joe there. But yeah, that 97 win over Notre Dame certainly set the tone. And he made the comment. I think Jack DeRoot was a sideline reporter in the interview. He said,
Yeah.
"We hope it's the first of many at Purdue." And who could envision that it'd be 87 of them in total? But that was great stuff, certainly.
Right.
Yeah,
Taking off on that also, that was a very important win for the whole campus, because if you recall that week, there was a plane crash, and I think 3 Purdue students had died out at the Purdue airport, and in a plane crash, and so there was just this gloom over the whole campus, and that beating Notre Dame was just such an uplifting experience overall. I think it was just really good, not only for the Purdue football program, but also for campus, and we really got that whole season, that whole fall season, just headed in the right direction, and ended up in a bowl game. It was amazing. It was a great turnaround.
Yeah, back in those days, and I'm still going to post-game press conferences. We go down the field with 5 minutes to go, and if you remember in the Notre Dame game, the final score was 21-10, but was that right? 28-17. I can't remember, but the point is, Purdue had a situation of third and 5 or whatever around midfield, and you thought, gosh, this is going to be a way Notre Dame's going to come back and beat them, and the famous bubble screen to Vinny Sutherland, and the fact that he took the risk to throw the ball, and I said that was the first sign that you knew something was going to be dramatically different. Of course, later in that year in the miracle against Michigan State, but I think also I remember Joe McConnell after remember he and Jim and Tom know this, did his coaches show part of it. They interviewed him in the hallway right after those games to do the coaches television show, and getting fans after they beat Wisconsin. The last time Purdue's beaten Wisconsin in Ross-Ade Stadium back in 1997, and to beat them soundly with Ron Dane beat Ron Dane and the Badgers that year, is that kind of talking about how the fan base needs to get used to winning. And that was always a statement of his, you better get used to it. He may have used that after the Notre Dame game as well. But again, kind of changing that mindset was important. All right, we're going to give Tom Kubat the last word here. Tom, of course, exciting news because he was inducted into the Indiana Football Hall of Fame. He's a 2-time Hall of Famer, obviously with the broadcasters and writers also in the state of Indiana. But talk about, give us your last word on Joe Tiller and what if you can sum it up of if it's something we've missed or something you think about in terms of that the opportunity that Joe Tiller has brought not only to this West Lafayette and Purdue community, but football in this area.
Well, the thing is, there's so many of them, and now I'm just kind of like drawing a blank. A lot of times, as much as I remember his coaching or this game or that game or a play in this game, it was just being in his office and talking to him, because a lot of times I'd be there and you could tell he was busy. So, and he was nice about it, but it was like, okay, ask your questions and get out of here. And then there were other times, where we'd get done with the formal interview and he just wanted to shoot the breeze. And it was always fun and entertaining and funny. And then with doing the book, I remember it was, I was first informed about it. You guys, I can't remember his name. It was Mike something. He was a former
Mike Pearson.
Mike Pearson.
He caught me up at the Big Ten kickoff luncheon in Chicago and threw it out. He said, "Hey, would you be interested in writing, Joe Tiller's biography?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. What does Joe have to say?" And Mike said, "Well, he doesn't know about it yet." And then lo and behold, Joe walked by. Anyway, we sat down and he ran it past Joe. And then he asked Joe, he said, "What do you think about this guy?" Pointing at me, being the author. And Joe, with his sense of humor, said, "Oh, I don't know. I got to think about that one." But then he quickly turned around and said, "Okay, we're good." But I was concerned because that was in August, and teams were reporting for camp and all that, and they wanted the book to come out before the next season. And I said, Joe's only got 2 or 3 more years left on his contract. Why don't you wait until he's done, and then we can write the entire story? And they said, "No, he's hot right now. We want to do it right now." And I thought I knew how busy I was during this football season. And I know Joe Tiller and head coaches were much busier. But anyway, we got back to campus and Joe set it up. He said, all right, if you come by my office every Thursday morning at 11, I'll give you an hour to interview for the book. And I thought, okay, that's great. But I wondered, once the season started, how long is that going to last? Well, we were still talking and meeting in February. And some of those 1 hour sessions turned into 2 hour sessions.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when we were done talking about the book, we just, talked. And I mean, you guys know Joe, he was just a fun guy to not only talk with or talk to, but to listen to. And I just felt like I really got to know the man and, and got to even admire him more so as a coach, but as a man. So I think about those conversations as much as I do about a certain game or a certain play, or, I do remember after they beat Indiana to clinch the Rose Bowl, probably more than anything else, I remember being on the field with everybody running around, but just, Drew with that rose in his mouth and Tiller the same, and the smiles on their faces and just how happy they were, put so much work into that, and then to be rewarded. And you could just tell they were just totally thrilled. And it was just exciting. And it was just neat to experience that.
Yeah, no doubt. Magical times, to say the least. And for all of us that have been around it, on it for a while, I don't know that it's going to get a whole lot better than that. It might be equal at some point in time, but hard to get much better than that. And as they always say, nothing hotter than new love. And that was what 97 and 98, especially. It was new and exciting. And that was and very, very, very memorable. All right, guys, thanks so much for your time. Again, 2 books if you're looking for to talk about or read something this summer, Tom Kubat's book, Not Your Average Joe, but also Tom Schott's book, which is really a definitive book on Purdue football history. And can you still get that on Amazon, Mr. Schott?
Yeah.
Okay. And just an excellent job, a really cool book too. And as well, that tell a great story of Purdue football. There was Purdue football before Jeff Brom and Ryan Walters. There'll be football after as well, but a lot of fun with that. And we'll look forward to keeping that legacy alive. 15 years since Joe Tiller's been on the sideline. That, again, hard to believe from that standpoint. But boy, one thing I think we can all agree on, it was a hell of a lot of fun for the very, very most part of that time in West Lafayette. So, guys, thanks again so much. Thanks, Nate. We'll be coming by to pick up our cars here before long. Just let us know when we can do that. But the good folks at Chariot Auto Group in Twin City, couldn't make it without you, but we enjoy these Monday night memories. Had a lot of fun doing these over the years, and this will be on the internet, it's going to be there forever. So that part's good. So, all right, guys, have a great rest of your day. Thank all of you for watching and listening to it, and have a great July 4th. This is that'll be tomorrow, and a safe one as well. And we appreciate that. Appreciate all of you. So have a great rest of your day.
Well,